So, Mark, one of the things that everybody's talking about right now are these Trump tariffs, and specifically with China, Mexico, and Canada. And, we're a show about houses, so we figured that today's conversation ought to be about how these tariffs could potentially affect housing prices and what that might mean for the end consumer. So I think it would be helpful to start off with what the proposed tariffs are, and then kind of get into what we get from these various countries. So what are you hearing on the subject?
So, first of all, I really think we should talk about what is the tariff and what is the expected outcome and why are we doing it in the first place?
Right.
Because that probably precedes the effects. You don't really understand until you understand how it's put together and then why we're doing this in the first place. Trump isn't just doing this. He's passing them out like candy. It's like an Oprah show. Tariff for you, a tariff for you, a tariff for you.
You get a tariff, you
right?
get a tariff.
It sure seems that way, but what's the point? And the point, the methodology behind it is, he is trying to put pressure on these other countries that we import a significant amount of goods from, to change their ways and their policies on immigration and drug traffic.
Yep.
And those two sometimes are related, and of course not always, but they're seeing a correlation. The drug traffic that's coming across is often, it's often tied to it. So point is he wants Mexico, Canada, China specifically to change the way that they handle those, because the cartel in Mexico, for example, everybody's always heard they rule Mexico basically, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure there's an economic impact to Mexico, to the country. And so there's some resistance to changing that dynamic.
Right.
So these tariffs are intended to influence them to do that. And tariffs, generally they're going to do one of three things. They're either going to drive up prices because, the goods, we're still going to buy the goods. They're just going to be more expensive now because of this tariff.
Right.
Or the companies that are producing them overseas are going to absorb the cost of that tariff. And so then we pay the same price, but they make less money.
Yeah.
And the third is kind of a combination of two almost. It's, the wholesale prices are going to have to come down to meet the amount of the tariffs so that, we're paying roughly the same. And you can see, there's arguments on both sides.
Right.
Right? So,
yeah.
So that kind of to go through what it is and why would we do such a thing. That's why.
Right. Yeah. And the definite initiative is to try to get the immigration under control in this country, specifically illegal immigration. Donald Trump ran on certain campaign promises, and it certainly seems like he is trying to make good on those promises, which makes his voter base very happy and makes the people that didn't vote for him very unhappy. But when you're talking specifically about the tariffs that he's proposing, I like to look at it from the housing perspective. What could this potentially do to affect the cost of housing? And I think those answers are found within the countries that the tariffs are placed upon and what we import specifically from those various countries. So I think we saw a statistic that said that 72% of our lumber is imported. Sorry, 34% of our lumber is imported, and 72% of that lumber comes from Canada. Right. We also know that a lot of our appliances and things of that nature, your stoves, your microwaves, refrigerators, they come out of Mexico and also China as well. So when you look at it from that, how do you build a house? Well, you frame it out with lumber. That could change things up. You can't have a house without a stove and an oven and a microwave either, unless you live in Singapore where they're building houses without kitchens. But I digress. That's a different topic for a different day.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's an interesting, fun fact. But it's amazing what will happen when you're running out of space. But and also it's important to note that it seems like there has been a 30-day reprieve in the Canada and Mexico tariffs specifically, because it seems like Mexico and Canada have come to the table now and want to work out some common sense immigration reform with Donald Trump. And he's going to give them effectively a 30-day grace period to see if they're going to hold up their end of the bargain or if these 25% tariffs are going to go into effect. So for the purposes of this video, let's assume they don't hold up their end of the bargain. we're looking at 34% of our lumber, so just over a third of our lumber coming from Canada, and we're looking at even higher percentage of that coming in the way of our appliances from Mexico and China. So when you take those two facts and put them into consideration, it does seem like it would cause new home builds to inflate their prices a little bit because their building cost is just simply higher.
Right, and that's part of it right there, is it's new homes.
Right.
And so, you know, I mean, I didn't realize we imported so much from Canada. You know,
Me either, actually.
And I mean, I grew up in the North. I grew up in Ohio. So Canada was just like another state back then. You know, you just crossed the border, came back. As a matter of fact, a buddy of mine and I did just for fun one day. And, you know, things have definitely changed since then.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize we import that much from them and that we're such a contribution to their gross domestic product, right?
Yeah.
And so the question, of course, goes back to, all right, well, what's going to happen? Well, as soon as they were announced, the 25% tariffs, that they were going into effect, there was a spike in lumber prices.
Yeah.
Because, you know, most houses are built out of lumber, and it's usually soft goods, pine, you know, that sort of thing. And so a lot of that is coming from Canada. Now, we could produce that in the U.S., but we just don't have, we have plenty of land to do it, but we just don't have that all set up. Trees take a while to grow, if you
Right.
don't know. You know, and a pine tree, you know, that's large enough to mill lumber out of, it might take, you know, 10 years, you know, 15 years. It might take longer. You know, but if you haven't built that already, then it's hard to backfill the U.S. products with
Right.
what came from Canada.
Yeah, and you're talking about the trim, not just the lumber, but the trim, the finishing pieces, all of that. So it's a substantial portion of the building process. And you know, the lumber, we're in your house, for example. The lumber that's already in this house has already made its way across the border, or, you know, it was derived from the U.S. But point being, there's no tariff put on the lumber that's holding this house up right now. So it does specifically equate to new home builds.
Yeah.
And we are still sitting at an inventory shortage across the country. What was the statistic that you told me before this? How many houses are on the market in Silicon Valley right now?
So yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this guy said, hey, you know, comparing two markets.
Yeah.
So you compare like Plano, Texas, about 250,000 people. And there's like 410 houses for sale in Plano right now. In Silicon Valley, similar size area, there's 37.
37 houses.
And so this is a contributor to the market and the pricing, because if you think about it, like in Plano, you know, things slow down, then yeah, you've got to lower those prices to the median income level where they can afford that.
Right.
Whereas, you know, Silicon Valley, you know, say what you will about Silicon Valley, but there's markets all over the country like this. There's only 37 houses for sale.
Right.
So you
and
just
no shortage of
find
millionaires in Silicon Valley.
Right. You just got to find 37 people that can afford the house, not 400.
Exactly.
And so it's a different thing. But you know, in general, yeah, new construction is likely going to be affected by this. It's not just the lumber, it's the appliances, it's the hardware. You know, I mean, you think like, how many things do you see that are made in China?
Every Amazon package that my wife has miraculously show up at our door seems to have a made in China tag on it, yeah.
Right, so inevitably that's going to have an effect. Now the question is, how much of an effect? So what do you think?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. I think that certainly if prices of lumber and appliances go up because of these tariffs, it's going to have to get passed on to the consumer. As you said in a prior video, D.R. Horton, Lennar, Meritage Homes, none of these have their, 501c3 charitable designation. These are for-profit companies, and at the end of the day, there's been a lot of builders that have gone out of business over the course of 30, 40, 50 years, and there will probably be more that go out of business in our lifetime. So in order for these companies to stay profitable and keep the lights on, they've got to make money. And if they're absorbing a higher cost, the common thinking is that it's going to get passed off to the end consumer. However, what I'm really interested in is these proposed regulation cuts that Trump is trying to do as well. So yes, we're going to have more expensive goods, but if we can get the regulatory, some of the red tape that's unnecessary out of the way, then you can lower costs in that arena, whereas they may go up in the actual cost of goods arena. And I'd like to see how that balances things out as well, because if you have less regulation expense, but more, fixed hard goods expense. Where does that shake out, and how does how do new build prices go from there? The ideal situation would be no tariffs, so you have fixed goods the same as they are now, or even a little bit less, and you drop the regulation. That would be the sort of the sweet spot. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
I think new construction, I think that can be affected for sure.
Yeah.
But there's so many factors that go into the market. There's existing home sales, for example. Like what's that going to do? Well, I mean, I don't see it changing a whole lot, honestly.
No.
In fact, I heard the other day that the houses that are pending on the market, something like 30% of them now have a price reduction.
Yeah.
Usually this time of year, I mean, we're in February. We just came off the holidays, went through January, everybody got their credit card bills. Now they're filing their income tax returns, getting a refund. They're starting to buy houses now.
Yeah.
But this year, we've seen a increase in the number of price reductions. That could be because they overpriced it in the first place.
Yep.
That could be a market adjustment. It could be many different things. But that's going to affect the existing home sales market more than lumber prices right now.
Right.
New homes, now that's a different story. New homes, because where are they going to build? What are they going to build the house from?
Right.
I mean, I have a friend who's building a subdivision of 3D printed houses. That's really cool. But I don't know as it's going to become the norm. Most of them are built out of lumber.
Right. And not for an extended period of time. They'll have to prove that concept out and, get the masses behind a 3D printed house. I mean, I think one thing we know, the only constant is change, right? Things are always changing. The way that D.R. Horton built a house 30 years ago and the way that they're building them now look completely different. So things are always changing. Materials are always changing. Companies are always looking to find more efficient and cost-effective ways to make houses. So maybe the conversation of lumber even being a building material 30 years from now comes into play. But we have to talk, it's 2025 and we're still framing houses in lumber. And so lumber costs do matter. And the interesting thing when you talk about inventory is I've got several buyers that I'm working with right now that want to make these low ball offers. I was telling you about one, when I showed up here at your house today. And what I'm finding is that buyers are thinking that it's 2008, and sellers, in a lot of instances, not all, but in a lot of instances, are thinking that it's post-COVID immediately, late 2020, early 2021.
Right.
So you have a subset of buyers who think that there's a fire sale going on, and a subset of sellers that think that it's the hottest market in 50 years. And the reality is it's actually kind of somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Like our market is kind of neutral right now. Like it's not a heavy seller's market because the interest rates are in the 7s. If the interest rates were lower, it would be a heavy seller's market because the supply is not meeting the demand.
Right.
But the demand is diminished to a slight degree because of the interest rates. But if there were...
Don't blame it all on us, on the lenders, right? I mean, the insurance, the taxes, all of that plays a factor. Insurance is a major problem in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And we should really, going back to what started the conversation, tariffs. We're doing this because we want to help control the immigration. Now, that's the illegal immigration.
Right.
If you're immigrating to this country legally, have at it. Great. Fantastic. That's awesome. Come on,
Exactly. My wife's an immigrant, so I've been with her the entire process. So
I mean, there's very few of us in this country that our families originated here. We all came from somewhere else.
Right, and those folks definitely don't look like us.
Yeah, and so I mean, there's nothing wrong with immigration. What Trump is going after, what his administration is saying they're going after, is the illegal immigration.
Yeah.
And the drugs that has been coming with it, unfortunately, and that's what he's focusing on.
Yeah. And I think one last thing to talk about before we wrap, and it's kind of the dirty little secret, and it's almost like saying the quiet part out loud. And guys, just before we finish up this conversation, we noticed that the majority of you that are watching these videos aren't subscribed to the channel.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Guys, if you're getting value out of these videos and you're enjoying our content, a subscribe to the channel helps us out tremendously, and it allows you to see our videos when we drop them. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Thank you.
Who builds a lot of these houses? And a lot of them are undocumented workers, the tradesmen, the people like that. So if there are going to be serious immigration reform and these people get deported, who's going to be building the houses? Because the reality is you have to call a spade, and there are a lot of undocumented workers that are right now across this country as we sit and film this podcast, constructing, remodeling, renovating houses.
Yeah. Well, and that's the unknown factor. I mean,
Yeah.
that could affect home prices
Right.
for new construction.
Exactly.
In
yeah.
general, it's going to be new construction. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you're remodeling. Now, if you talk about like what's going on where the fires are in California,
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of remodeling or rebuilding. North Carolina after the hurricanes.
Right.
Those areas for sure are going to be affected because it's not just new construction, but reconstruction.
Right.
They're rebuilding a house after a disaster. And, if prices are up, then that's going to have an effect on the general market anyway.